Hi, this is Steve and Stevie. We are back with building some Broncos, and this time we're working on my Bronco stuff for a change. It's a miracle. So, but we're only doing this so we can get Stevie's in here and get his built. So anyhow, this is a disc brake 44 out of a 77 Bronco that I'm putting in my 71. I also have the 9-inch that came out of the 77. They were a beefier housing, nothing drastic, but I'm putting that in there. We're going to show you how to set up some front ends, Dana axles, and it applies to most all. You know, I've built dozens of these, but it's been quite a few years since I've set anything up other than an 8.8. So I'm going to stumble a little bit, but I'll try to show you how to do this without all the fancy tools that Dana and all of these gear manufacturers say you have to have. I did, however, finally, after all the years, buy a case spreader. So this is the first time that I'll have used one that I own. I've used them at shops that I've worked at before, but most of the time you don't need case spreader. These things here go in these plug holes, and what they are for is all you're doing is relieving a few thousandths of stress off the housing so that you can fit the proper preloaded shims on your carrier bearing, the side bearings, differential bearings, and you can get them in there without them, but it can be also quite an adventure to get them in there. So the things you're concerned about with any axle is you're concerned about pinion depth, you're concerned about pinion preload, you're concerned about preload on your side bearings, your carrier bearings, and you're concerned about backlash and gear tooth pattern. Okay, those are the main things you're concerned about. New seals in the housing, they're old. They've been sitting in this housing for a few years. We're pretty sure that they're ready to go. Now, when you try to if you take a cap off of these differential bearing, make sure that you put it back in the same exact spot. They're usually machined and mated for the proper side. It's not the end of the world, but you can see it from there. So try to keep these oriented and in the place they're supposed to go. Now I've got to clean this housing out, get the gasket surface cleaned off, some rust from where the bearing's been sitting, just a little light surface rust. Now in the Dana axles, look at that, see that, pay attention. The preload and backlash shims are behind the bearings, the side bearings, the carrier bearings, and so what a trick you can do is take your old set of bearings and you hog them out with a die grinder on the inside of the bearings so that they'll just barely hand fit on and off, because you're going to have to change these shims around a lot. You always start with the factory pack, factory shims, and you set it up and try it. There is the pinion depth shims are under this race here. You hog out the outside of the race so it just slips in by hand, and then on the inside there is a set of preload stack of shims, and then the bearing slides on here, but that's all hand fit. So you'll also want to hog out the outside diameter of the outer pinion race as well. We're going to walk through all this. This axle is going to end up with a Detroit locker, 456 gears. I've got some CTM joints for it that I've been sitting on a Detroit locker, and some good 300M CTM joints for, I don't know, 18 years. I don't have chromoly shafts going in it, but so right now I'll just put the factory shafts and factory 260 joints in it until I can order shafts. It's not a big deal. But so let me get this stuff cleaned up. This is the power locker. Everything that I'm putting on here is used except for the Detroit locker and the bearings, which is still very odd for me. I'm usually putting used stuff together, but this power locker has been rebuilt. I am giving it to my son. He's going to put it in his 44 with 410s. These gears are going on that. There's a Detroit locker in there, and I've got a new bearing set here. And shims, I've got a lot of shims to go around, so we're going to start getting this differential set up, and they'll go and match that 9-inch that we've already built. That's just got a Ford track lock in it. So let me get this cleaned up, and we will go from there. So. So we got this housing cleaned out a little bit. We're not completely done. Pulled the outer pinion out and the seal, and then there's a slinger. Bearing sits down on top of the race. We grab them, taking out. The slinger goes there, and this slinger keeps the oil seal from being inundated with oil. And most people end up taking them out and throwing. What's this thing? I don't know. How does it go in? I don't know. They throw it away. It should be in there. It sure doesn't hurt anything. So, as much stuff as I build from time to time, I save almost everything. So anyhow, what we're setting up, I'm going to save all these races and bearings that come out of this. I haven't driven out the inner seal yet, excuse me, the inner race yet, but I did take shim stack out.
It's right there.
Here they are, right on the pinion. Rudy and I were talking about. Okay, so this first shim stack that's underneath the outer bearing goes on the pinion like this. The inner bearing rides here, goes up against the race that's in the housing right about here. The outer race is right here. You can see if you want. In the end, shine up here, bud. Okay, that's the outer race, and the inner race is down there. And the pinion goes in there and sits like this. The bearing, and then the outer bearing goes. Can't make it go. Must have a little dirt or something on it. It goes down up against that shim stack. So when you torque the nut on the yoke down, you're torquing this outer bearing up against the inner bearing and race, and it makes a solid stop up against this shim stack. And what you're trying to do is get the proper preload on these bearings. They can't be loose. They have to have a little bit of preload, and they can't be over tight. So the manufacturer says that it needs to have, for the sake of argument, as a general rule, 20 inch-pounds of rotational force. I'll look the spec up to be exact, but that's a good rule of thumb for most axles. So once you put this in there, and that's with no seal in the housing. So you put all this together, you put the yoke on it, and you torque it down, and once it's torqued to spec, it's shoved down against the shim stack. You get a little inch-pounds torque wrench, and you rotate this, you know, I always just go clockwise. It needs to take 20 inch-pounds to rotate that pinion, okay? But most people don't do that. That's kind of important because as bearings wear, you know, it's gonna get loose. And then these bearings are the ones that take most of the abuse. The side bearings, they almost never go bad, but the pinion bearings are the ones that take the abuse. So that's what the shim stack is for. There's another shim stack under that inner race that locates how deep pinion is down inside the differential, how deep that it meshes with the ring gear. And that has to be set. That's trial and error, unless you have special tools that set up the center line of the axle shafts, and there's special numbers and, you know, and a big chart you can use from Dana. Well, in the field, that's just not done like that unless all you do is differentials. So what you have to do is set it all up, put it together, check your gear tooth pattern, set the backlash, and your preload's is not going to change. So you set your preload, you use the stock pinion depth shim pack, set your diffs up, put it all together, torque everything down, and try it. Now, that's why, since all these bearings are press-on except for the outer here, you make all your bearings and races to where they will slide in and out by hand. You hog them out, grind them off, and you have a sacrificial set of bearings. I always use a used bearing. Of course, there's going to be a little bit of differential between that and a new bearing, but it actually works very well. So then once you get your shim stacks all figured out, then you just slide them off and you press your new bearings on, you put it together, recheck it, and I've never had it not be right there. So we're gonna get started on this. I'm gonna drive that inner race out, and I gotta hog it out. I gotta keep the shim stacks together, obviously, and get started. So. All right, we're back with our 44 for this 71 Bronco. So what I needed was some bearings, and I did hog these out. I made some setup bearings, and these are old Timkins. I hated to grind up the Timken bearings. In my experience, they're very good. And you need the inner pinion race ground. And there, I got them really close, so that's how you want them. So you want to be able to slip these in and out, because this is where the shim stack goes for setting the pinion depth, for the inner pinion race, and for setting the preload and the backlash. These are where the shims go behind on all Dana axles, behind the side bearings, the differential bearings. You make them where they just slide on and off, and these are right on the money. So what I use is, I've done it with a carbide bit. That takes forever because these are obviously hardened steel. But a nice little stone wheel on a die grinder bangs it out real quick. I did these just on a bench grinder, so they slide in and out. Here is our shim stack right here for pinion depth. I have to replace this, obviously, this baffle shim, but what's going in there? This is the power locker. This is a power locker that my son is getting. And these are the best limited slip, besides maybe a True Track, in my opinion. It's just my opinion. These are great. They're 4 pinion. I rebuilt this with new side gears and new pinion gears and cross shafts and clutches. Somebody had set this up wrong a long time ago and scored it up with the pinion gear. You can see that. So this is going to go to my son and his 44. We're going to build it next. 411 gears. It's a 4 series carrier. I'm putting the Detroit locker. It's been sitting on the shelf for 18 years or thereabouts. It's a little rusty, but it's a 4 series carrier, going with 456 gears in this, and I'm gonna get some shafts. I don't know whose shafts I'm gonna run yet, but I've got CTM joints. So I'm gonna get this cleaned up, get the gear put on and torqued, and I'll set the pinion preload, and we'll see how our pinion depth and backlash and gear tooth pattern is by setting this up. We spread the case and get our shims all put on. So let me clean all the surface rust off of this, and we'll get after it. Okay, so next part on our Dana 44 build for our 71 Bronco, we have, let's see if I can rotate this up, fall off the stands here. We have set the pinion depth to the factory setting. We're gonna determine that with our gear tooth pattern to see where it's at, and we set the preload. And I think on the rotational force of this, it takes, where's my torque wrench? 25 inch-pounds.
You can see it takes that much.
So there's several different sources for specs on this. Anything between 15 to 30 is good on a 44. And we are there. So now we have built our setup bearings. I've got a setup inner race, which the shims go behind. I have ground out these carrier bearings, the differential side bearings here. I got to get the shim packs on there. Stacks.
There.
Nope, right here.
Never mind.
I've got to clean them because they look dirty. So let's clean these first. Okay, so we got where I'm going to start with getting this carrier in here is with the factory shim stacks off the power locker. I touched base on this power locker. These are one of the best limited slips made, as far as I'm concerned. A lot of times they can factory in some Ford and Dodge units. You can get these in a Dana 70 out of 2000, late 90s, mid 90s to 2000s Dodge Dana 70s and 80 axles, and they're really strong for a limited slip. I've heard up to 90% lockup. I don't know that they'll actually lock with tire off the ground, but they're pretty awesome. So anyhow, I gave it to Stevie. We're gonna put it in his 44, and I bought this Detroit, like I said, years ago. So I've ground out these bearings for the differential side bearings where they slip on and off. So this is, you make yourself a set of setup bearings. If you're rebuilding an axle, you're gonna buy new bearings, just use your old ones. So that's shim stacks on that side. And I've cleaned these shims off. We're gonna set it on there. Now, of course, I got to dig up my races. You can fit these in here, and you get the races. Let me grab them. Oh, I want to touch something on this torque wrench. This is a very fancy torque wrench. I think this torque wrench is like $600 or $700. A Snap-on. I bought it at a swap meet for $20 or $30. I saw that and I was like, I'm all in that, you know. But you don't have to have an expensive one. I've used a click type. You just go under the spec and make sure that it clicks, and you go over the spec and make sure that it doesn't click. And if you're within the spec, which in this case is 15 to 30 inch-pounds of rotational force, then you're in the ballpark. I mean, it's as good as you can do. The old torsion bar type that had a little needle on it worked really good for that. And I looked and looked and looked to find one of those for quite a long time, years, and never could find one. I ended up finding this dial one, some stupid antique tractor swap meet. So one way you can do this without a case spreader, and just set your unit up in here, and you cock the bearings, the races just a little bit, and then you got to work it. You got to work it in there with a hammer, sometimes a block of wood, and get them in there. And they usually, that's how I've always done it, and they work, because you actually have to have some preload on here, and it needs to be tight going in. But like I said, I bought this case spreader, and I've used them before, but I've never owned one personally. So we're gonna set this up and put it on there, and get this thing set in there. So let me figure out the setting on it, and then we'll be back. Now, like I said, we got this thing set up in here, and we're starting to spread the case right now. This is completely not necessary. I've built dozens of these things. I've put gears in trucks sitting out in the mud, in a mud hole, and the axle blew up. So, you know, we've done dozens. Not that that's the way to do things, but we have. A little bit of lube on your bearings, stuff helps, but not necessary. Let's see if we got there.
You will?
I might, and it might be. Of course, I got these shim stacks are kind of puffed out because these bearings are not pressed on. They're just sitting in there. So you cock the races a little bit to get it to start like that. And once you start working it down in there, you got to tap them back. You got to tap them back into place.
Okay.
Nope, that's not.
Okay.
Way cocked. So you gotta work it in there. You just be gentle about it.
You're not all the way in over here.
I know. I got a special tool. This is for putting in the Ford shims, cast iron shims, and I've actually broke it, but I'll make another one. Sometimes you just use a block of wood. You're not beating on your metal bearings all the time. This might be a little on the tight side for preload.
That's going good.
Oh yeah, that's what the case spreader makes life easy. You know, and I mean, if you got to use a brass hammer or a big chunk of wood, then you do it. You got to make sure they're seated, because you got, now at this point we're checking backlash and gear tooth patterns. Anytime you can look online, see if I can find a good display. Here you go. Not great, but it'll work. You can look online and find anything or any book, and they'll show you gear tooth pattern. Will you be towards the the toe or the heel of the tooth? But I think any of these are acceptable. It says here, ideal contact, ideal. All right, tooth is too high, tooth is too low. So these two are ideal. These a little low. So it's not rocket science, and trust me, if I can do it, anybody can do it. But it does take a lot of time. There's a lot of back and forth, in and out and in and out. You just have to be patient, and you absolutely can do it. So you can hear it when you seat it. When it finally hits the bottom, it'll give that sound that you've made it. So we're going to back this case spreader off, and we're going to just check backlash and see if we're in the ballpark. Backlash, a good rule of thumb is, what is it? I've seen it a lot of different ways, and different gear manufacturers have different specs. So just look it up, and got to have the information. You know, you can't just go, that looks good, and go for it, because you'll tear up gears and you'll tear up bearings, and you have to do it all over again. And these are so in-depth doing. It's so much easier just to do it right the first time. Okay, that thing's nice, but
Hefty.
all right. So, and normally you would torque these, but I know I've got them seated, so we're gonna see what we got for backlash. Not a lot. All right, okay, it feels good. I'm gonna get my dial indicator, and we're gonna check backlash. If the backlash feels good, or is within spec, then we're gonna torque it down, recheck it, and then we're gonna check our gear tooth pattern. If we're on the money with this, hey, great. We gotta completely disassemble it, press on the new bearings,
And new races.
tap in the new race, put the seal in, re-torque the pinion nut to 200 foot-pounds. You gotta remember that 200 foot-pounds, and the 60s and the 70s are like 250, which is, trust me, that is no fun. You gotta have some pipe wrench to hold it. They make a special jig to hold the flange, the yoke, but you know, I've made them for like flat flanges, but you know, I use a big pipe wrench. So anyhow, let me get my dial indicator, and let's check backlash on this thing, and then we'll see if we're just in the ballpark. And if we are, we'll torque down the main caps, which these I believe are 70, and we'll go from there. All right, so I got the dial indicator out. I got several of these, and I picked these up at like garage sales or whatever, man, you know, because they're expensive. Something like this, I don't even know what this would cost today. This is an old Starrett, I think. I think this might be a Chinese base, but the gauge is a Starrett, which is good. Central is hard to beat. That's what some of these dial calipers are. But now you can get these, you can get them cheaper now, and they're all pretty good. Central is very good for the money. So you're gonna set this up in such a way that it sets, and you're gonna put a gauge on the back of the tooth here. You're gonna put the dial indicator on the back of the tooth. Getting ahead of myself here. This gauge I don't like the way this all sets, but this is a kind of a set that I put together. It's not actually, I don't think it's actually meant to go together. But it's what I had. But it does a good job. So I've got some that have a clamp-on little base. It's got like a teeny little C-clamp that goes with it. But the magnetic base is so convenient. Extension here and makes it easier sometimes. You don't always need it, sometimes you do. Just be gentle with these gauges, you know. I had a Central that it was a buddy of mine's for years and years that I just kept using. I finally just quit mooching on it. Get in there. Oh, you gotta fight me. Alright, so we're gonna get this laid out in such a way. It's not rocket science. So you want to know how much this free play between the ring gear and the pinion gear that we've already got set. And there's enough preload on the pinion gear that it won't rock. So move it one way. I'll move it back that way. And you can zero the gauge. You don't have to, you can just count it, but zero the gauge. And then move it back the other way. So I am right at more than I want to be. I'm at 15.5 thousandths. That's too much for new bearings and just use gears, but new bearings, doesn't matter about the gears. That's too much. So we're gonna move a thin shim. It depends on what's in the stack, and so we want to move. If our gear, and we're going on the assumption that the gear tooth pattern's in the ballpark, that the pinion depth is in the ballpark. And this is all trial and error, unfortunately, like this, but you don't have to have a lot of specialty tools. Just a dial indicator. And like I said, I've done enough of these that if I had to do it in the woods, I could go, yeah, and honestly, in the woods, this would run, especially on a front end. But, so I need to move a shim from this side to this side. Okay, you don't want to go start getting crazy on your shim packs. Keep an eye on where they come from, how many's there. Don't move them around until that way you know, and make one change at a time. So hopefully I can find a 2.5 or a 5,000 shim in this stack, and I'll just move it from over here to over here. And that's another reason, like, you don't want to do these press your bearings on and then have to press them off, because one, you can tear up the bearing trying to get it back off of there, and two, you can tear up your shims. I have shims. I got boxes full of shims because I've done a lot of this. So we're gonna put the spreader back on it, pull the case back out, slide the bearing off, and find a 2.5 or 5,000 shim and move it from the driver's side over to the passenger side, and that will move the ring gear over that way and tighten up our backlash a little bit. So let's do that. Okay, so we got our carrier out of here. And let me zero this. We're gonna pull a shim off, pull a shim stack off. So this is the passenger side. We need to move a shim from the driver's side to the passenger side. So here looks like the smallest shim. Let's see what it is. Ooh, yeah. That is a 2.5 thousandths shim.
Start there.
So hopefully that's enough. I'm scared that I maybe should do a 5 thousandths.
Yeah.
Then if I'm wrong, then that means I'm gonna do it again. So let me see what I got here. This might be 5,000. Nope, another 2.5.
I'll take 2.5s.
Two 2.5s. It's probably the smarter thing to do, because those are you get beat up easy. All right, let's do the 2.5s there and move them to the other side. Put it back together.
Oh, it's so easy. Look at that. Boop.
Look at that. Boop. All right, let's flip this thing over here. I might even spread this case a little more because it did try to, it thought it was coming out a little bit. All right, do a couple more cranks on this spreader. Yeah, this makes life nice. I think I paid $70 for this.
Ooh, it's so nice.
I bought one years ago.
That would have made too much sense.
Yeah. Okay. Make sure you don't have grease and dirt, not grease, but dirt in here because, you know, dirt can add, it all adds thousands, you know, it can fight you. Make sure they're clean. These are Koyos. They're okay. Timken, BCA, Federal are my favorites. Timken, but oh, that was genius.
He did it. Dropped all the shims.
Setup bearings make life so much better. All right, here we go. And these machine services will cut the mess out of you, so please be careful doing this.
Oh.
Not up against it. There we go.
I was wondering, I'm like, is that
Yeah,
against it?
Not moving.
It's not good.
So it's still got backlash, so that means I didn't go too far. All right, so let's zero it. Oh yeah, I made a good choice. Still deeper than I want to be. I'm at 11 thousandths, 12 thousandths, and honestly, of course you want to just move on, but I'd rather have it tighter than that because I'm right at the limit.
That's for new bearings. These are old bearings too.
I could move a 2.5, and that would put me down below 10. That's where I'd rather be, but
It's not that big of a deal. We don't have to press off bearings.
right, it's at 11, so I'm in spec. You know, and any shop would be like, "Ooh, we're down the road." I'm just gonna move it one more because I like things to be a little on the tighter side because as things wear, you're gonna lose a little bit of that. So, and it won't take that much. So, let me get this switched around. I'll just move the shim like you saw. Do one more. We'll be right back. So we got another 2.5 thousandths shim moved over to the passenger side, moving the ring gear over a little more. Got it in now. Granted, you really should torque the caps on here, but I've got it seated really good. I have a tool that I made that seats these, and I also use it to drive in the cast iron Ford shim. So anyhow, this gets us in the ballpark. I'm still not touching or something. Whew, that's a little snug. So I could have screwed up by not torquing the caps, but a little bit of experienced guess. So there's 0. Yeah, see, I'm a little on the tight side. I'm more than a little on the tight side. So
Yeah, put it back.
I gotta put it back. So that's the way it goes. So
Then we torque.
I was at 11. Well, I was within spec. I am now at 6 thousandths. That's too tight. Hold on a second. New bearings.
These are old bearings.
But no, I got new bearings in here. New races. Let me double check my spec. Big sweep. Okay, good. Now get way down. There you go. Perfect. Good job. There you go. Checking. Good job. Well, make it click. Did it move anymore? Not really? Okay, it's alright. And we're going to check our backlash again.
We're back.
Hit it with your purse. Beauty.
Alright, so we're getting ready to check the backlash again after we put the shims back to where we think it needs to be.
Hopefully this will be the final check.
And
Now you want it pretty parallel.
Okay.
Excuse me, perpendicular. Loosen up a little bit there. Come here, fight me. Come in and just have it compress a little bit. All right, now tighten it. Oop, not touching. All right, it went out. Okay, so rock it back and forth. Make sure the gauge moves. Okay. Here, hold down here so we can see what's going on. Easy, be gentle. Just very, I'll rock it and put it down here.
10. Right at 10.
Okay,
11.
go the other way. See if it goes with 0.
Yeah, 11.
Okay, so we had it.
Right,
So
11.
okay, so we're in the money. Richmond says 8 to 13. So we're in the money. When I moved that 2.5 to the other side, the second adjustment, it went down to 6, which is too tight. You can have gear binding problems if you're not careful. Now you should rotate this around and check it in 3 to 4 different spots. So we're going to do that, and that'll tell you if you have any excessive run out on either the carrier or the ring gear or something in between, like some grit or dirt or something like that. So now we've got it set up. No, wait, actually that's not true. I've got to check the gear tooth pattern.
Yeah.
So let's get some compound on it, and we'll rotate this and check the gear tooth pattern. Sure, it's hard to see, and I'm not doing a good job filming this, but the gear tooth pattern is like right in the middle, and that's basically what, if you're more towards the heel, that's bad. If you're more towards the toe, that's bad, and you don't want it going down too deep in the tooth. You don't want it too far up. If the gear tooth pattern is starting way up in the tooth, then you're going to wring that gear off. If you're down too low, you're going to bind. Can't be too towards the heel. If you're too far towards the heel, then the pinion is too far back. If you're too far towards the inside, then your pinion depth is too much, and you score up the carrier. Like this one's been done. That was too deep pinion depth. And it's, and we do it by, I don't have the fancy measurement tools that Dana wants to sell you or whatever. But that is what you're looking for. You're looking for that middle of the tooth. That is the drive side on a 44, the cambered side. Okay, so we just checked our gear tooth pattern on this thing. Our backlash is at what, 11?
Tight 11.
Within spec, it's a tight 11. That's fine. So I've got my setup bearings, which is the differential bearing, and the race, the inner pinion race, has to be able to come in and out because that's where the pinion depth shims go. So we have to completely disassemble this now, and you also set it up without a front seal, so you can get your pinion preload set. Now, one of the things you can do different than what I did is you can set the pinion preload last, because you'll have the depth. You won't be wasting your time torquing that thing down and getting the preload just right when the pinion has to be moved. Not that it'll change your preload shim stack, but you can just set the depth, your backlash, get your gear tooth pattern proper, and at the very end you can just set your pinion preload, take it back apart one time, put the seal on it, and torque it down for good, and put your new bearings back on. So we've got to press the bearings on the carrier and hammer in the inner pinion race and torque this thing back together, new seal, torque the yoke on, and this thing's done. Putting a cover on it and putting axles in it, it's ready to go. So I hope this was able to help a little bit. We're gonna bolt this thing in front of a Bronco, pull another front 44 out, and build Stevie's next with 410 gears and power locker, and that's it. So we're getting that, and then we're gonna start putting them together a little more. So hope maybe this helps.